it's another hazard for us.
Absolutely,
Yeah, help.
Hey,
we don't want it to be a hindrance, so we need to make sure people are aware of it.
thanks for highlighting it, Diane. Thanks very much. The yellow dots there, Diane Rogers there from Blind and Low Vision NZ. And by the way, U2 did not have the most Grammys. Fact checking here. Thank you, Sam. Beyonce got the most with 32. Then you've got George Salty with 31. Then Quincy Jones with 28. U2 is down at 22, and they have the most Grammys by group. So that is a fair point. So by group, it's U2, then the Foo Fighters, then the Union Station, which is Alison Krauss, isn't it? And then the Chicks, the Dixie Chicks, with 12 Grammys. Amazing. What a great band. See, that's music. The Chicks. That is music, isn't it, folks? Yeah. Anyway, Julia Hartley-Moore, Steve McCabe, wonderful to have you on the program. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint is next.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, a mega investor in fossil fuels is going to deliver Aotearoa a cleaner, greener future, according to the government. So how will the $2 billion BlackRock Renewable Energy Fund work? And is the controversial multinational the right bedfellow? We talk to the Energy Minister and an investment expert. Beware the vaping hack that has parents and the fire service on high alert. The house where a missing real estate agent was last seen is back on the market as the search focuses on farmland. And no much room for error, a warning to foragers following a lethal lunch in Australia. We've got the do's and don'ts. You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The Prime Minister hopes a $2 billion climate infrastructure fund will make New Zealand a hub for renewable tech expertise. The government has announced the first of its kind partnership with US investment company BlackRock. Its goal is to have New Zealand be one of the first countries to have 100% renewable electricity by 2030. Chris Hipkins wants the country to be a world leader in climate action.
I've heard some argue that New Zealand should be a fast follower when it comes to climate action. That as a country that produces less than 1% of global emissions, we have no role in being at the front of the pack. I could not disagree more with that assessment.
The fund will be available for green energy projects like solar, wind, battery storage and charging electric vehicles. Police are going door to door in their search for fugitive dad Tom Phillips after confirmed sightings of him in Waikato last week. Mr Phillips disappeared 18 months ago with his 3 children. Inspector Will Lochran says officers are speaking to locals in the Pomarangi, Te Anga and Marakopa road areas. He says police are also searching for 3 motorbikes and a quad bike. The vehicles are a Honda 50cc motocross bike, a black Suzuki 200cc Trojan bike, a Honda XR 200 and a Honda 2008 4Trax quad. The detective in charge of the Yenfei Bao homicide investigation says information from the public and police inquiries have led to the focus on rural areas south of Christchurch. 44-year-old Yenfei Bao was last seen in the suburb of Hornby nearly 3 weeks ago. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves says search and rescue teams spent the day today scouring farmland next to the road in Taitapu and Green Park.
We also have specialist search who are here, who will be doing different parts, but a lot in those tree lines and just being very thorough in this area over the next couple of days.
West Coast residents want reassurances that a nearby landfill isn't posing a health risk. A letter from residents was read out at a regional council meeting today, raising concerns about contaminated waste and offensive odours at the Taylorville Resource Park near Greymouth. Resident Adrian Van Dorp told councillors they want answers.
Every other day I have to deal with the smell and the noise, but mainly the smell. But we've seen that as it's transpired, it is toxic and it's in a cloud of invisible poison that drifts over all our properties.
The council is reviewing its consent process for the landfill. A person was rescued from a landfill pit at Taylorville last week after they were overcome by fumes. Police have arrested a man who was at the scene of last week's fatal shooting in East Auckland. A man was shot last Saturday in Point England, later dying from his wounds in Auckland City Hospital. A 28-year-old has been arrested in Glen Innes today for breaching his bail. Detective Inspector Glenn Baldwin says police are expecting to make more arrests. The Automobile Association is warning prices at the pump will stay high over the next couple of months. Price tracking website Gaspy shows the average price for unleaded 91 fuel has gone up by 4.7% in the last 28 days. The government's fuel subsidy ended in June, adding about 29 cents a litre to fuel prices. Terry Collins from AA expects the rise to continue.
What I'm assuming to see is the prices going up slowly. I think they're looking at stabilising the barrel around about $90 a barrel, somewhere around there. They're doing it by production cuts. The inventories, although China's got a big inventory right now and perhaps could put a downward pressure to negotiate it if it got too high too quick.
Terry Collins says increases were also prompted by Saudi Arabia cutting oil production. To sport now, and there are two clear favourites in tonight's final round of the top 16 Women's Football World Cup clashes. In Adelaide, world number 5, France, play Morocco, who are ranked 67 places below them. Colombia, who are ranked 20 places above their opponents, Jamaica, play in Melbourne. While this shapes as possibly their biggest game ever, Reggae Girls coach Lorne Donaldson says they haven't changed their preparation.
It's just music and dancing. I mean, that's why we're the Reggae Girls, guys. We love to have fun, and I just think there's more important thing in life than football. You're not going to come around this way again, so you might as well enjoy it, and, you know, when it's over and done, you can remember and say, I had a good time.
In 3 games so far, Jamaica have scored just 1 goal but haven't conceded any. Meanwhile, Football Ferns defender Michaela Foster has re-signed with the Phoenix on a 1-year deal for the upcoming A-League season. And the Silver Ferns coach, Dame Nolene Taurua, is confident there'll be enough experience in New Zealand netball to be competitive at the next World Cup. The Silver Ferns went into the tournament in Cape Town as defending champs, but slumped to their worst ever results in finishing 4th. A couple of senior players are expected to announce their international retirements, and whether Taurua will continue beyond this year is unclear.
We do have some debts coming through, and we're probably still about 400, 450 caps less than other teams. But I also think it's just about timing of the next World Cup will be in favour of New Zealand.
That's the news.
Questions are asked about police responses.
Was there nothing else that they had to offer? Was there nothing else? An unarmed man, and he is now dead.
Nurses sign up for a new pay deal, but all are not happy.
For our everyday work, nothing changes with this collective agreement. We still have unsafe staffing. We still have patients and nurses at risk.
And a dog ban affecting Wellington's mayor.
So we kind of go up and above and beyond for our dogs. We take them to the office, we feed them the best foods, we set up Instagram accounts for them.
The big dogs of news. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Taranaki, a few showers. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumarunui, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow with morning frosts. Wairarapa, Whanganui and from Taihape to Wellington, also for Nelson and Bulla. Scattered showers, some heavy with hail, clearing tonight or tomorrow morning and becoming fine for a time. Rain or showers developing tomorrow afternoon or evening. Westland and Fiordland, occasional showers in southern Fiordland and a period of rain tomorrow, otherwise fine. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow afternoon or evening with heavy snow inland above 200 metres. Otago and Southland, occasional showers with snow above 300 metres, becoming frequent and heavier tomorrow and snow lowering to 100 or 200 metres. And for Dakohu, Chatham Islands, cloud increasing, rain developing this evening, then turning to rush hours tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government has announced a first of its kind $2 billion climate infrastructure fund. It's partnered with investment giant BlackRock with the goal of New Zealand being one of the first countries to transition to 100% renewable electricity grid by 2030. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins is calling it a game changer for the clean tech sector, but questions remain about how the fund will operate and about the wisdom of teaming up with a sometimes controversial multinational. Emma Stanford and cameraman Nick Monroe were at the announcement, and Chris Hipkins says he wants New Zealand to be ahead of the pack when it comes to climate change.
Chris Hipkins says he wants New Zealand to be ahead of the pack when it comes to climate action.
I've heard some argue that New Zealand should be a fast follower when it comes to climate action. That as a country that produces less than 1% of global emissions, we have no role in being at the front of the pack. I could not disagree more with that assessment. I don't think that it's an understatement to say that today is a watershed moment in our transition to 100% renewable electricity generation and our goal of net zero emissions by 2050.
The pool of money will be made available for green energy projects like solar, wind, battery storage and electric vehicle charging. BlackRock Head of Australasia, Andrew Landman, says the innovation of New Zealand businesses is one of a kind.
We firmly believe New Zealand could be the first country in the world to achieve the 100% target. And this initiative is one step closer to hopefully helping that and bringing the public and private sector together to create enough capital and innovation and prosperity for the employment of those investee companies.
BlackRock's Asia-Pacific Head of Climate Infrastructure, Charlie Reid, says to get to net zero by 2050, the world needs to invest $200 trillion of capital.
Bring that closer to home, that's $1 billion every hour until 2050. And when you look at New Zealand is currently in the future at 83% renewables. And it's one of the leading renewable power markets around the world.
Opposition leader Christopher Luxon welcomes the investment, but says the challenge is getting consent.
You can build a wind farm in 2 years, but it's taking 8 years to consent it here in New Zealand. And so what's unclear here is actually the consenting process that actually speeds up the development and the delivery of renewable energy projects.
Mr Hipkins accepts it has been difficult.
Consenting has been a challenge in the past. It's one of the reasons why we introduced the fast-track consenting rules that we've had in place over the last couple of years that have sped up consenting for things like wind farms. It does make it somewhat curious that the National Party are voting against RMA reform, which of course will make that fast-track permanent.
Solar energy company Solar Zero has previously teamed up with BlackRock. Its chief executive, Matt Ward, described the $100 million arrangement as transformational.
We've gone from 5,000 customers to 10,000 customers inside 12 months. And recently we've also invested in our platform, which has enabled us to participate in the low residual market and help keep New Zealand's lights on.
BlackRock anticipates the fund will be in full swing by the end of the year.
John Berry is Chief Executive of fund manager and KiwiSaver provider Pathway Asset Management, and he joins me now. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora, Lisa. Hi, it's actually Pathfinder, not Pathway, but we'll run with that.
Oh, no, sorry, Pathfinder. It's there in black and white. I may have read it wrong. Apologies. In a nutshell, for people who don't know, what is BlackRock?
Yeah. BlackRock is a large US-based asset manager, so probably the largest asset manager in the world with about 12 trillion New Zealand dollars under management, and that's a massive number, right? So I sort of think of it as the GDP of the UK, India and France all combined together, so it's a massive global investor.
So how does a deal like this work? If we invite them in, how much control does the government have over what happens next?
Well, that's an interesting question because we just don't know through the detail. We know they're a large global investor, so we welcome investment in New Zealand. We just need to be aware of the bargaining power and sophistication they'll have, which could be a massive positive for New Zealand. But we also need to recognise that they are profit-oriented. Like they're not. They're investing around the world to make money for their investors. What we want from New Zealand is to grow infrastructure here, is to decarbonise and generate prosperity here. So we just need to be aware that the goals we're trying to achieve are matched with the deal we're agreeing with them.
Well, when you talk about control and influence, I mean, what about mission critical infrastructure? For example, one of the things that BlackRock used as an example today in the press announcement was that they've invested before in charging stations for electric vehicles, right? So if they were to have control of all of those in private hands, I mean, should we do that with mission critical infrastructure?
Well, we kind of have that with our petrol stations at the moment in the fossil fuel world of private ownership of the infrastructure. We need the infrastructure built, and the capital has to come from somewhere. So, we welcome private investment in building infrastructure in New Zealand. We just need to make sure it's on the terms that make sense for us as a country.
So do we know anything from what you saw today? Do we know anything about the terms, whether there are any restrictions on the investment that the government is welcoming? You know, the T's and C's, the terms and conditions, what are they?
No, well, it's called the Climate Infrastructure Fund, which implies it's, building infrastructure, but they're also talking about battery storage, green hydrogen. So it's not entirely clear if you think of the stage of building infrastructure, you have the technology development. So that's venture capital and high risk investment. We'd welcome that investment in New Zealand to develop technologies here. Is it that part of the investment stage as well as the development, which is building, like our KiwiSaver at Pathfinder has invested in lodestone solar, building solar plants, solar farms in New Zealand. That is more risk. It's risky actually developing it. Once you've built it and own it, you get the cash flow off the operation of it, and that's the least risky part. And it'd be interesting to know which parts of that sort of life cycle, the development of the technology, the development of the solar or wind sites, and then the operation of those sites, where exactly is the money from this fund going to be directed?
In going into this partnership, should the government care about the fact that BlackRock is a massive investor in fossil fuels?
Look, BlackRock is would be regarded as a global leader in ESG, environmental, social and governance investing, and some people say it does too much around climate change, and a lot of people would say it doesn't do enough around climate change. It is a global investor with investments in fossil fuels, investments in renewable energy. We just need to make sure the investment they're making in New Zealand makes sense for us as a country.
And also, BlackRock is currently under investigation in America, right, over its investments in China. Again, something we should be concerned about or not?
Yeah, look, there are a few criticisms of BlackRock. One is in America, there is criticism around its investment in China. Another is around the control it has over companies. So along with State Street and Vanguard, it controls 20% plus of a huge number of S&P 500 companies. So there's massive voting power that they have. But that voting power is in public markets, and really the investment they're making in New Zealand is in private markets in the unlisted space.
So, does BlackRock make any claim to being an ethical investor, or are they just an investor interested in making money? Bottom line.
They would say they're a responsible investor.
What's the difference, John?
The difference is an ethical investor, which is what we would say Pathfinder is focuses on. Ethical investing is firstly values. We invest in values. So around climate change, we would say it's important to invest in a way that mitigates climate change, because that is the future we're creating for our children and our grandchildren. A responsible investor, which is BlackRock, would say, okay, put the values to one side. We need to take climate change into account because it is a risk for the future. It is a risk for our investments in the future, and we need to invest in decarbonising and companies that are decarbonising, because they'll be more resilient as the world transitions to lower carbon. So it sounds like quite a nuanced difference, but actually from an investment perspective, it is quite an important difference.
Can I have a very quick answer to this? Do we need to be wary of BlackRock?
I just think we need to, not wary, we just need to be aware that they're a very large global investor. They are there to make money for their investors. They're sophisticated. They know how to invest in decarbonisation and renewable energy, so that's a big positive. We just need to be aware that we are negotiating a deal around infrastructure in New Zealand, and we need to do it on terms that make sense for us as a country and for future generations.
Good to talk to you, John. Thank you for joining us. That is John Berry from Pathfinder Asset Management there. It is 17 minutes after 5. Kia mau tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you've got some thoughts on that one, give us a text. Send us a text 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Happy for this arrangement with BlackRock, a $2 billion fund for renewable energy projects. Young people are hacking their used disposable vapes to wring more use out of them in a growing trend that has parents and emergency services worried. The fire service says the DIY method to prolong the life of the vaping device, which involves opening it up and exposing the battery, poses serious fire and injury risks. Anna Sargent reports.
A mother in Auckland was confused when she kept finding broken USB adapters around her house. Learning the reason why shocked her.
I found out that the kids had been trying to recharge single-use vapes in my house. I'm gutted. Just pure frustration from a parent. How do you stop them from doing it?
She says she knew her 15-year-old daughter had a vaping problem, but didn't know she had been resorting to this to continue getting her fix. And she isn't the only one. Multiple posts in the almost 2,000-strong Vape Free Kids NZ Facebook group has revealed other parents have made similar discoveries, like this mother in the far north, who has described how her 15-year-old son has been in a downward spiral of addiction since he started vaping a year ago.
He was almost demanding from us that we buy him vapes or we buy him fluids, which we didn't do. But, it got to a point where, it felt to us like this is what you see hardcore drug addicts doing. And then recently this year, or earlier this year, we kept finding the split wires in his room. So he was trying to recharge disposables. So that was the next thing.
She says the household have had to hide away wires and scissors so he can't access them, and they've tried warning him about the danger.
We actually talked to him. Actually, you've got a lithium-ion battery in there. If it explodes, it's going to explode in your face. And, it could set the house on fire.
And that is a real danger. Fire and Emergencies Risk Reduction and Investigations Manager Peter Gallagher says there has been an increase in the number of fires resulting from lithium-powered devices. He says young people are relying on sources such as YouTube tutorials to recharge disposable vapes, but messing with the lithium-ion batteries poses serious fire and injury risks.
We are aware that this is a bit of a growing trend, particularly overseas, and obviously with the internet, that information comes to New Zealand very quickly. When people are manufacturing their own charger, they're cutting out some of the regulators that prevent overcharging, and that can be catastrophic for the battery.
And he warns this risks the batteries exploding or causing a fire that is very difficult to extinguish.
They don't burn necessarily for a long time, but they burn with a lot of heat, and so anything that's around them is then ignited, and so the fire begins to grow.
The Vaping Industry Association, which advocates for the industry, says the issue of vapers making homemade chargers is confined to cheaply made disposable devices, which are able to be broken into to gain access to the battery. It believes all vaping products should have sealed batteries rather than replaceable ones to prevent this kind of risky DIY from happening.
And that was Anna Sargent reporting 21 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we're always interested in your feedback. Let us know what you think about that fund. $2 billion fund in partnership with BlackRock, the big investment company. It is for renewable energy. What should it go on and why? Are you comfortable with the arrangement? And let us know if your teens are up to a bit of DIY with their vapes as well. Interested to hear your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie is standing very by with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says today's $2 billion climate infrastructure fund is a game changer for the green energy sector. The government's partnered with US global investment giant BlackRock to put money into solar, wind and electric vehicle charging as the country moves towards a goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2030. The chief executive of KiwiSaver provider Pathfinder Asset Management says it's not yet known how the deal with BlackRock will work. John Berry told Checkpoint it's important to make sure the terms of BlackRock's investment work for this country. The homicide investigation launched after the disappearance of Christchurch real estate agent Yinfei Bao is focusing on rural areas south of the city after information from the public. It's been nearly 3 weeks since the 44-year-old wife and mother was last seen as she door-knocked in the suburb of Hornby. A 52-year-old man has appeared in court charged with kidnapping. Police say they've detained a 28-year-old man who was present at Saturday's fatal shooting in Point England, East Auckland, and they anticipate further arrests. The man was taken into custody today in the city's Eastern Glen Innes suburb for breaching his bail. And Zoom, the internet communications company that helped people work from home during the pandemic, is now telling its own staff to get back in the office. Zoom wants workers on site at least 2 days a week, depending on how far away they live. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington on what looks like quite a wet evening for you. State Highway 1 is now down to one lane northbound at a crash site next to the West Chester Drive off-ramp. There are queues northbound between Ngaudanga and Glenside. In Motueka, State Highway 60 remains closed to southbound traffic after a crash this afternoon at the intersection with Parr Street. And because of snow, chains need to be carried on the Milford Road tonight. That's on State Highway 94. Our next traffic news and headlines are at about 20 to 6.
Thank you, Evie. The quarter-finalists for the FIFA World Cup will be confirmed tonight when the last 2 rounds of 16 games are played in Australia. 4 of the top 10 ranked sides have already been knocked out of the tournament, including the world champions and the Olympic champions. Colombia, Jamaica, France and Morocco are still vying for a place in the next stage of the competition. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. So bring us up to speed on the quarterfinals. It's going to be late night, is it?
A very late night for those last 2 games. So 6 of the 8 are already locked in, and 2 more will come from those 4 countries that you just mentioned there as well. But after your late night, you do get a couple of days break for...
Okay.
Because the quarterfinals don't actually kick off until Friday. So that's Spain and the Netherlands in Wellington and Japan and Sweden in Auckland. I'm hearing tickets for that Auckland game are actually quite hard to come by, which makes a little bit of sense because the 7 games that have been at Eden Park so far, 4 of them have surpassed 40,000 spectators, which is quite a good deal after thinking that maybe we weren't going to be showing up for this, especially after the football ferns weren't involved any longer. Also, according to local organisers, it's actually 82% of these tickets are being sold to New Zealanders, people living in New Zealand. It was nearly 18 or just over 18% of them are going to the USA supporters. Again, people that might be looking for another team to support now that the USA aren't still in the competition. So there are potentially tickets available for that Wellington game though, so if you wanted to get to that. The next 2 quarterfinals are in Australia, so that's the co-hosts Australia, who listeners may or may not be supporting. They survived last night against Denmark, so they've secured their berth, and it was the Euro champs England have also got their other quarterfinal berth. So they're waiting on the results of tonight's game. So that's France are going to be hoping to halt the debutant Morocco. So there's 67 places between these 2 teams in the world rankings. So France are ranked 5th in the world. So they're obviously quite the favourites going into this one. But Morocco probably want it to be a little bit of a fairy tale finish between these 2 teams as well. And the other game is Colombia and Jamaica. The Jamaicans lost every game at the 2019 World Cup. This time they haven't let any goals in, but they've only scored 1 goal in 3 games. So they're probably going to need to score a few more, or we might be sitting up waiting if it's another penalty shootout overnight as well.
Okay, interesting. All eyes be glued to that. New Zealand's Paralympic cyclists are continuing to shine at the Super Worlds. Tell us more.
Yeah, so the paracyclists have taken their medal tally to 10 medals. We've crowned 2 more world champions today. So that was Nicole Murray and Anna Taylor, who won golds in the Omnium in their respective sport classes. So this was Taylor's best result at a any event that she's been to, and it happened to fall on her 32nd birthday. So what a way to celebrate your birthday with a gold medal, right? And it was her first medal of the World Champs as well. She's got a few more races to come. And for Nicole Murray, this was actually defending her world title in the C5, and that actually completes the set of medals for her at this world event. She got the bronze in the 500-metre time trial and the silver in the 3-kilometre individual pursuit. So these are both obviously track events that they've been participating in. The road cycling continues in a couple of days' time. We might be back to talk about more medals. These two are also very good on the road.
Fantastic. Thank you, Felicity. That is Felicity Reid, our sports reporter. Australian investigators say it is unclear whether the woman who cooked a lunch that turned lethal ate it or the mushrooms that are believed to have fatally poisoned 3 other diners. A 4th person is seriously ill in hospital after the shared meal in a small South Gippsland town in Victoria. Now, police have spoken to a woman who is the daughter-in-law of 2 of those who've died. Her children have been taken into care while the investigation continues, and items have been removed from her home for forensic testing. Now, the case has turned the spotlight on foraging, that is collecting wild food, and Peter Langlands is a professional forager and joins us now. Hi, Peter. How popular is it to go out there searching for food?
Oh yeah, kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, it's certainly getting a lot more popular now, and yeah, the interest is exponential. Really, it's quite a wave of foragers out there on the landscape.
What about mushrooms in particular?
Oh, definitely, mushrooms are a real focal point for people. Yeah, they've really captured people's imagination, and especially, as I say, in probably the last few years, it's just yeah, it's phenomenal.
So, there are some dangers. What are the tips that you can give us, and what to be wary of?
Yeah, it's a real science. You have to be really totally 100% sure of what you're picking. There's just no room for error. I won't say there's not much room for error. That's become a bit cliche. But yeah, no, it is a really technical thing. You've really got to be slow and methodical with mushroom foraging. Yeah, look, you can't really make any assumptions if there's a whole lot of mushrooms growing together and they all look similar. You've still got to slow down and look underneath each mushroom and just confirm its identification.
So do we have super dodgy mushrooms? Sorry to interrupt, but do we have actually super dodgy, deadly mushrooms in New Zealand?
Oh, totally, yep. We have the death cap in New Zealand, Amanita phalloides, which is really, the number 1 killer globally. And we've got a whole host of others. So, there's 15 that come off the top of my head that are pretty much deadly straight off the bat. There's a whole lot that will cause some pretty bad symptoms.
Like what? What are we talking here?
I guess it's a lot of it has been outlined, but it's really intense nausea and then excruciating pain, and very much goes in waves and delays and honeymoon periods. And the death cap is quite an enigma too, because it actually, from the few people have survived eating it, it actually reportedly tastes really good. And that's why whole families have ended up eating death cap mushrooms. And the nausea and the impacts are quite delayed. You have to wait several hours at least before you'll feel sick.
So, Peter, to that point, to the point that people have said it's a tad tasty, this deadly one. The other thing a colleague pointed out, usually nature sends you a very strong signal that you should stay away from something. It's usually weirdly coloured or bright or whatever. Not so with these things, is it?
No, not at all. No, it's from an evolutionary point of view quite an enigma, actually. So...
how do you know?
I'm not sure of any other mammals.
How do you know it's a death cap? What are the telltale signs?
Oh, yeah, it's got quite a fleshy white base in the ground, and then out of that bulb the stalk comes up. It's got really clean white radial gills, and it will have a lemony olive-coloured cap. And they're also what's known as a mycorrhizal mushroom, so they grow in association with trees, and in New Zealand, my understanding is primarily oak trees.
Okay, well, you couldn't trust me with that one, because that sounds exactly like the yummy mushrooms I buy at the supermarket in terms of its look, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cliched mushroom. It looks really quite attractive actually. It's quite an elegant mushroom. But yeah, I've actually never personally seen one in the flesh, to be honest. I'm in Canterbury and they're extremely rare here. They're mainly in the Nelson, Waikato and Auckland regions.
We have also noticed a trend, like of people taking photos of things when they're out foraging and putting them up on social media and saying, is this okay to eat it? Sort of seems a bit roulette-y to me, that.
Yeah, it is. If the person does it well and takes a series of, say, 6 diagnostic photos and also does a spore print, then you can be pretty confident of getting the identification right. But that only pertains, of course, to that one mushroom in the photo, and that you have to make sure that all the other mushrooms they've got are the same. But yeah, there is a standardised way of taking photos of mushrooms to confirm their identification, but you have to show the top, you have to show from underneath, you have to show it in situ in the environment it's growing in, and you also have to show the base of the mushroom quite clearly, and also maybe in cross-section as well, with the mushroom cut down the centre and cut in half, because some of them will have diagnostic colour changes over time.
So basically, best not to eat it. Best not to eat it. If in doubt, chuck it out.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the golden rule. It pays to go out with an experienced forager. I run professional foraging courses with fungi, and I've also foraged mushrooms for restaurants, and that's really put it to the test. And yeah, touch wood, everything's gone well. There's just no latitude for error. It's a real wake up call, I think, for New Zealand, because our season really is going to start up in the next few months, and it's a good time of year, I think, for people to be made aware of this issue. And my thoughts go out to the people who have been involved, the lady this has happened to, and the person that's still in hospital. It's one of those things. It will really knock them quite. It's certainly it
is a terrible thing. Peter, while we've been talking, people have got in touch. They want to know if poison mushrooms have a particular smell.
No, not really. There's no golden rules, so you just have to go species by species. There's some generalities. Generally, if a mushroom's got really bright white radial gills, be extremely careful. A lot of the mushrooms that have got brown rusty radial gills too are quite toxic. Also be extremely careful when you pick mushrooms in the early stages. That's when the different species can be confused. And if anyone does eat a mushroom and they think they've made a mistake, my personal advice would be just don't hesitate. Just ring 111 straight away. And you can always back down from there if you need to further down the track.
Good advice. Don't take any risks. Don't take any risks and get help. Thank you so much, Peter. It's been fascinating talking to you. That is Peter Langlands, who's a professional forager there, talking particularly about mushrooms. It is 25 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa I nai ko Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. Regulations capping some MasterCard and Visa credit card fees. Now, the anticipation is and the expectation is that savings should be passed on to the consumers. What are we talking about here?
Well, this is a story that we've been covering for some time, and it's about, when we use an FPOS card and we insert it or we swipe it, there are no fees attached to that. That goes back to the 1980s when there was a FPOS code of practice. We're really quite unique in the world with that, which meant that these types of charges would be free. And so when PayWave came in and credit cards became much more common, those fees were not exempt. And there's been reluctance for merchants to absorb them. They don't want to because the other options are free. So they've been passing those charges on to consumers by way of what we call a surcharge. You might have seen that sometimes.
It's on the FPOS machine. Sometimes you have to accept it.
Yes, that's right. So it's not uncommon to see those surcharges. And what this is designed to do, the Commerce Commission has worked very hard, decided that maybe we could deal with it by limiting what those charges could be. But it's not that easy. And so all they did was start from the point of where banks and Visa and MasterCard meet. Those fees are capped. But the fees that the banks then charge the merchants can be anything. And so retailers have been struggling to pass on these savings because some of them don't see the savings at all.
So bottom line, if you swipe your card, is it going to get any cheaper for you?
If you swipe your card, it's going to be free just as it always has been.
No, I mean, when I say swipe, I mean, it's
PayWave.
Yeah, just go ding, ding, and away you go.
No, not necessarily. But the Commerce Commission did some number crunching, and they found that the amount of saving available to the merchants is about $105 million a year. And they're saying those costs, that saving should be passed on to consumers. But the big question is how? So the big retailers can possibly do it because they've probably got a better negotiation going on with their bank. But a small retailer maybe not. So I spoke with the Retailers Associate NZ today, their chief executive, Carolyn Young, and she says, well, look, we're going to review this ourselves, and we're going to see whether in 12 months, whether or not we can figure out how to pass on these savings. In the meantime, consumers are probably not going to be able to realize the savings that are out there. The Commerce Commission, on the other hand, said that if they don't see a change, they have the power to regulate at the merchant, at the point of sale.
Okay,
so something's going to happen, but it's not going to happen tomorrow, I don't think.
All right, a warning shot, let's say. Okay, businesses who make workers redundant in a recession could face a bit of a consumer backlash. Now, this, Nona, is a double-edged sword.
Why, yes, and it's interesting. So an organisation, it's a communications firm called Anthem, did this survey, and they were really surprised themselves at the amount of skepticism amongst consumers generally. So the idea here is that this study found that 2/3 of people, if they learned that a company was laying off staff because of a recession, they would have a very negative view of that particular firm. In some cases, 1/3 would say that they would just not shop there. And
thus entrenching the poor financial position of the company.
And then half said they would have far less trust in a firm that would do something like that. Now, interestingly, people felt that nearly half of the people that were surveyed thought it would be okay to cut back on people's pay rather than, cut their jobs. So I don't know exactly.
Interesting to think.
So yes, look, I tell you what, though, it just goes to show that reputation really matters. And if you're not treating your staff well in a recession or whatever, you are going to face some kind of consumer backlash because consumers want the companies that they do business with to treat their staff well.
Okay,
the bottom
Nona,
line.
should we take a sprint around the markets,
please? Okay. So the NZX Top 50 Index, it ended down 0.5% today, and that was to 11,869. We're entering the reporting season, so over the next week, we're going to start hearing a lot of corporate results. We'll see what that does to the market. But in the meantime, the dollar is trading just under 61 cents, 60.8 US cents. It's under pressure for sure. 92.9 Australian and 47.7. 47.7 pence.
Don't forget the 0.7.
Well, I hope
Thank
you're not
you,
going
Nona.
to the UK tomorrow.
Not anytime soon. Ka kite. That is Nona Peltier with Business News. 20 to 6 now, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or whakaaro, we love your feedback, so do get in touch. Let us know your thoughts on anything on the program. I mean, how do you feel about paying those extra charges for the old PayWavy thing? 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And it's time for the headlines. Well, time for the headlines. Anea Evi, mena pita kōrero.
Police say armed officers responded to a family harm incident at a home in Newtown near Wellington Zoo this evening. Armed officers were deployed as a precaution due to threats made, and a man has been taken into custody. Police are going door to door in their search for fugitive dad Tom Phillips after confirmed sightings of him in Waikato last week. Inspector Will Lochran says officers are speaking with residents in the Pomarangi, Te Anga and Marokopa Road areas. Hurricanes rugby player Isaiah Walker-Leaweri has been banned for a month after testing positive for cannabis. He tested positive a week after the Hurricanes match against the Fijian and Drua in May. The usual ban for such an offence is 3 months, but Drug Free Sport New Zealand says the lesser term is on condition he completes a substance treatment program. The Automobile Association says fuel prices are staying high for now. The average cost of unleaded 91 has risen by 4.7% in the last 28 days after the end of the fuel subsidy and Saudi Arabia's cut to oil production. India's parliament is debating a no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. Leading the opposition's charge is Rahul Gandhi, who returned to parliament on Monday after his membership was restored. And the discovery of an unexploded American Air Force bomb dating from the Second World War has led to the temporary evacuation of 13,000 residents of the German city of Dusseldorf. Bomb disposal experts are working to defuse the 500-kilogram device. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington, all lines at Glenside on State Highway 1, all lanes at Glenside on State Highway 1 are now open. There may be residual delays there northbound. In Motueka, State Highway 60 is still closed to southbound traffic after a crash this afternoon at the intersection with Parr Street. And tonight, chains must be carried on the Milford Road because of snow. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
You'd be able to put a set of chains on a car, wouldn't you, Evie?
Probably. Just lay them down and then drive into them, right? And then clip them on.
Back yourself,
absolutely.
100.
I can tow a trailer, I can change a tyre, all of that.
Superwoman, fantastic. OK, it is poaching season. Queensland Police are looking to recruit New Zealand officers to the Sunshine State with the promise of, quote, warmer days and higher pays. And the police union here reckons the campaign could erode Aotearoa's front line, with the sweeteners pretty attractive to younger officers. The Queensland campaign is using Kiwi converts as bait. Here's a taster.
Little backstory. I've been 13 years in the New Zealand Police. I was in youth aid, so a specialised role. I printed my total remuneration in 2018 when I left. That was 88,000. I did say to myself that if I earned more than that in the QPS, I'd stay, I'd go back. And after my first year in 2021, 2021 to 2022, I got paid, I think it was like 116,000 total remuneration, so I stayed.
Winter's not winter. When it's 14, 15 degrees in winter, that's like a summer in New Zealand. So these days, I'll wear shorts, t-shirts. Apart from working, I'm in longs. But apart from that, it's just shorts and t-shirts every day. Yeah, it's pretty magic. So.
Queensland Police are describing it as a cheeky campaign, but Superintendent Renee Kurtz acknowledges it's a serious push because they are looking for 1,450 international recruits in the next 18 months.
Look, this is part of a broader attraction program. We are very actively trying to recruit not only Queenslanders from all different ages and demographics and locations, but also interstate and also internationally. And this is just an opportunity to have a cheeky dig at New Zealand and offer up our 300 days of sunshine and our warmer weather as a bit of a carrot to come and join us.
So why Kiwi officers in particular?
So New Zealand, we readily identify that they're highly skilled and highly trained with the New Zealand Police Academy over there. And there's definitely alignment in terms of community. So that's why we're having a go, but also we want to bring good police officers over to Queensland and serve the community over here.
How many ideally would you like?
Oh, how many have you got? So we are actively recruiting 1,450 new police by 2025. That includes domestic and also other areas, including interstate in Australia and international. So we don't have a set number of how many New Zealand police, but this isn't a new thing. We have always had an arrangement with New Zealand that we will recognise their prior service in New Zealand and remunerate them at the appropriate rank and also pay level to try and entice them to come over.
Yeah, it's not new, but you're giving it a serious nudge, right? So let's go through what's on offer. A 20k bonus, it's a moving bonus. So is that supposed to cover the cost of then getting to Australia, or is this on top of that?
So what that is a new thing. So we want to acknowledge that it does cost a lot of money to, come over the ditch, but also for their families. So this 20k relocation is on top of their pay. So like I said, we will recognise their prior policing experience.
So what is that in real terms?
Earning
Superintendent, sorry
their first year. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but in terms of the pay, you say you're going to recognise their rank and experience, right? So in terms of like-for-like salaries, what's the difference?
So, for instance, the starting wage, at the lowest starting wage we will recognise is a constable, and their starting wage is $78,000. So, and plus the $20,000 relocation bonus. And we will recognise their service up to the highest rank of senior constable, and they can be earning up to $107,000 plus overtime and allowances, plus the $20,000 relocation bonus.
Okay, so
and that's just in their first year.
How expensive is Queensland? Because cost of living is a big issue, right? So can you tell us anything about the median house price over there?
Well, it depends where you are. So we obviously have a very big state, and house prices vary in different locations. Obviously, southeast Queensland is more expensive.
What's happening with your violent crime stats over there, going up or going down?
So we definitely have crime issues like New Zealand does, although slightly different. It's no secret that we have an issue with domestic and family violence, which we're definitely trying to address and make systemic changes to. Youth crime is obviously in the news quite regularly, and we also want experienced police to help us tackle those problems.
And gang problems too, yeah, in your area?
Look, they are very different to New Zealand. I am aware of the issues that New Zealand are experiencing at the moment. So, you know, that is part of a problem, probably not our biggest problem, but a problem that we are trying to address.
So it's a challenging policing environment there. It's not all sandals and T-shirts and sunshine and the beach.
No, of course not. Policing's a really tricky job. We see people at their best, and we definitely see people at their worst moments. But one thing I can say, it is very, very rewarding for people who want to make the community safer and make a difference.
And in terms of the quality of your police force, I noticed a commission of inquiry November last year. Your own commissioner acknowledged you've got problems with racism, misogyny and sexist behaviour within the police force. And the New Zealand Police Association says professionalism isn't the same over there. What would you like to say to that?
There's definitely room for improvement in any organisation, and we're taking many, many steps in terms of leadership, culture, diversity to address our responsibilities internally, but also to make sure that we're delivering proper and comprehensive services to the community in terms of crime.
Superintendent, did you pick up the phone and call our commissioner and say, hey, just a heads up, we're about to start a little poaching campaign?
I am aware that the Queensland Police Service Commissioner has spoken to them, and I have spoken to New Zealand Police Recruiting today, definitely, and we've had a good joke at it.
And that was Superintendent Renee Kurtz. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of it coming in on BlackRock. This is the company behind the $2 billion investment fund for renewable energy that was announced by the government today. This person says, what is BlackRock getting for their investment? Sovereignty over our power supply? It's a deal with the devil. Well, the Prime Minister has said that they won't be investing in those state-owned assets. It's for private developments. Another says ahead of the pack, so he sold New Zealand to an American corporate. Alex from Wellington says $2 billion could buy 500,000 good e-bikes for New Zealanders. Getting people out of cars is a much better climate action. I wonder if BlackRock will be keen about that approach over subsidising electric cars. And Tim is really happy about BlackRock coming in with their investment fund. Very happy to see BlackRock invest in renewables in New Zealand. Huge experience, highly professional and competent, and actually doing something in this space, unlike our two major political parties, says Tim. Keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The house where missing Christchurch real estate agent Yang Fei Bao was last seen has been handed back to the owners and is again up for sale. It's almost 3 weeks since the 44-year-old disappeared. Police have arrested a man for her kidnap and today moved their search for her from waterways south of the city to farmland. Rachel Graham has more.
Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves says the examination by police and ESR at the Trevor Street address, which was for sale and where Ms Bow was last seen on Wednesday, July 19th, had revealed important information, but she wouldn't say what. She says they are still seeking more information.
The public have been amazing with the information that they have been providing to us. We know that certainly Christchurch and New Zealand is very invested in this investigation. We have received over 280 pieces of information.
Detective Inspector Reeves says the information they've received so far is pointing them towards the Taitapu and Green Park areas, but they have also been looking in other parts of the city. They're still seeking sightings of a silver Mitsubishi car on Thursday, July 20th, and reviewing CCTV footage.
We have been really fortunate in that we have secured a lot of CCTV. That obviously involves investigators sitting there and watching it. It is a time-consuming process, but we're very happy with some of the information that we've got from CCTV.
Police search and rescue staff spent today meticulously checking farmland along the roadside in the areas of Taitapu and Green Park, about 30 kilometres south of Christchurch. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves says the searchers are walking in a line, shoulder to shoulder, scanning the farmland for anything that could help the investigation.
Obviously, Yanfei Bao is still missing, so we're certainly still looking for her, and we're looking for any items of interest to the investigation. So anything that's found is assessed for whether it's relevant to the investigation or whether it's not.
Close to $50,000 has been raised through a Give a Little for Yanfei Bao's family. Her relatives in China are still making arrangements to get to New Zealand, but Detective Inspector Reeves says police are in daily contact with her husband and daughter here.
They are, distressed and upset, as you can well imagine. They are holding up remarkably well, and they're very grateful for the support from all of New Zealand.
Detective Inspector Reeves says there is currently no plan to scale down the search, and she is confident they will find Yanfei Bao.
It is 6 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A forensic clinician has told a jury that Lauren Dickinson's mental health was badly deteriorating at the time she killed her children and has grounds for both an insanity and infanticide case. The High Court trial for the 42-year-old murder accused has stretched into a fourth week at Christchurch. Dickinson is defending 3 charges of murder following the death of her 3 young daughters, Carla, Maya and Leone, in 2021. The court heard further evidence today from another psychiatric expert in the trial. Adam Burns was in the High Court.
Dr. Justin Barry Walsh interviewed Mrs. Dickinson exactly 3 months after she killed her children. The court heard about the woman's bleak outlook.
It was the 3-month anniversary of the death of her children, and she was also telling me that, if anything, her mood was lower than it had been. She described it as like a kick in the guts, that she had no future and just wanted to die. She told me that she was missing the kids a lot as well.
It had been a similarly grim view for the mother only a few months prior upon arriving in New Zealand. Dr. Barry Walsh described Mrs. Dickinson as being overwhelmed by the world at this time.
Killing her children seemed right. She noted the world was gripped by the COVID pandemic, that everyone was wrapped up in cell phones, and she was concerned about the future and all the worries ahead of her. She considered her children would be better off dead.
Defence lawyer Anne Tui asked the clinician about whether the mother had fully recovered from postpartum depression between the birth of the twins and the night the girls died. He believes she had not, but it was not clear-cut.
More likely than not, probably even had not fully recovered, as I understand that term. As I've already said, this is not an easy task. There has to be some uncertainty about this. I think there are pros and cons to this. I think there is evidence that does go both ways.
The jury heard about Mrs. Dickinson's improved well-being, underlined by moves to stop taking her antidepressants in early 2021. But Dr. Barry Walsh does not believe that she had fully recovered.
And if I saw this woman at that time, say in March or April 2021, what would I have thought about her need for further treatment? I would have likely said, look, you're getting better. There's still issues from your postnatal depression. You still need more treatment.
Defence lawyer Anne Tui asked him about Mrs Dickinson's motives for the killings. The clinician believes there was an altruistic motive and did not appreciate the moral wrongness of her actions.
In terms of your opinion as to Mrs Dickinson's motive for killing her children, what did you consider in your opinion that was?
Well, I considered that a motive for killing the children was that her suicidal thinking. She also believed that the children were better off dead.
Dr Barry Walsh later faced cross-examination by the Crown. Prosecutor Andrew McRae suggested to the expert who had to travel that his interviews with the defendant were rushed.
That meant that your time was essentially precious in these meetings, that you needed to move things on perhaps a little bit faster than you would otherwise do if you had the luxury of being able to come and go as you please.
Barry Walsh conceded it was a possibility, but felt confident he'd obtained a comprehensive background. Mr McRae also asked Dr Barry Walsh why he halted an interview when the defendant discussed the events of the 16th of September. He said she appeared to be suffering and in distress despite assurances she was fine to continue. The trial continues tomorrow.
Adam Burns reporting there. And let's get to some of your feedback. A lot of it is coming in on BlackRock. This is the investment company that the government has partnered with, multinational. This listener says, so global fossil fuel investor BlackRock manages to greenwash itself by buying impoverished New Zealand to be its poster boy for renewable energy. PR con extraordinaire, says Ruth. So this was unveiled today by the Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, $2 billion to go into renewable energy projects. Tom says New Zealand contributes 0.17% of total world emissions. Our first concern or focus in expenditure should be on adaptations to our infrastructure and planning where people will need to live. Second should be developing technology that will give the biggest and fastest return. New Zealand going 100% renewable with BlackRock's money is something other than logical, says Tom. On other subjects, on mushrooms, actually, this is an interesting one in from a listener about foraging and having to be really cautious about knowing your mushrooms because some of them can be absolutely deadly, as seen in Australia. This listener says in France and possibly some other European countries, you can get your foraged mushrooms identified at many chemists if you're not sure. How cool is that? Take them into your chemist shop and they'll let you know whether they're good, bad, or you should throw them away. On the subject of pay wave, and this is the fees that Nona was talking about and the call for people not to be charged so much or for those fees in part to be returned to the consumer. David's got in touch to say, as a blind person, using PayWave or Apple Watch takes only 10 seconds, and with more machines being replaced by touch screens, it's going to get inaccessible for me if retailers put surcharges on. That is just an extra second wasted, says David. On the subject of vapes, this is kids tampering with the vapes. These vape issues have... worry about that one later, eh?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A fund management company has warned the government it should be conscious of the motivations of the US investment giant it has struck a deal with. The government has announced a $2 billion climate infrastructure fund with BlackRock. It hopes New Zealand will become one of the first to transition to a 100% renewable electricity grid by 2030. Pathfinder Asset Management Chief Executive John Berry has told Checkpoint BlackRock is driven by profit at the end of the day.
They're a very large global investor. They are there to make money for their investors. They're sophisticated. They know how to invest in decarbonisation and renewable energy, so that's a big positive. We just need to be aware that we are negotiating a deal around infrastructure in New Zealand, and we need to do it on terms that make sense for us as a country.
A trial of safety cameras in Auckland has recorded nearly 250,000 instances of people not wearing a seatbelt or illegally using their phone in just 6 months. The Waka Kotahi trial spanned 3 locations across Tamaki Makaurau. It found 2% of drivers illegally used a mobile phone while driving and 1% of vehicles had occupants not wearing seatbelts. Transport Agency Manager Tara McMillan says the trial is a first step in collecting data on road safety. The detective in charge of the Yinfei Bao homicide investigation says information from the public has led to the focus on rural areas south of Christchurch. 44-year-old Yinfei Bao was last seen in the suburb of Hornby nearly 3 weeks ago. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves says police search and rescue teams spent the day scouring farmland next to the road in Taitapu and Green Park. She says search specialists will focus on the area over the next few days, particularly along the tree line. West Coast Regional Council says it's sought assurances about asbestos in a controversial landfill. A letter from residents near the Taylorville Resource Park was read at a Regional Council meeting today, raising concerns about asbestos-contaminated waste, noise and offensive odours. Council Chair Peter Haddock says the council is reviewing its consent process for the landfill.
But I have talked to the operator about that following the letter, and they advised me that they haven't done any asbestos there for quite some time.
Last week, a critically injured person was rescued from a pit at the landfill after they were overcome by fumes. Young people are hacking their used disposable vapes to wring more use out of them in a growing trend that has parents and emergency services worried. Fire and Emergency's Peter Gallagher says young people are relying on sources such as YouTube tutorials to try to recharge disposable vapes. But he says messing with the lithium-ion batteries poses serious fire and injury risks.
We are aware that this is a bit of a growing trend, particularly overseas, and obviously with the internet, that information comes to New Zealand very quickly. When people are manufacturing their own charger, they're cutting out some of the regulators that prevent overcharging, and that can be catastrophic for the battery.
Peter Gallagher says this practice risks the batteries exploding or starting a fire that is difficult to put out. A forensic psychiatrist believes that Lauren Dickerson was still under the influence of medication when interviewed by police. Mrs Dickerson is standing trial in the High Court at Christchurch, charged with murdering her 3 daughters in September 2021. The 42-year-old has pleaded not guilty to the charges, her defence built on a case of insanity and infanticide. During cross-examination, prosecutor Andrew McRae told Dr Justin Barry Walsh to be careful with his remarks.
She probably was still affected to some extent from the overdose and impact that might have had on what she said at that time as well.
And we need to be very careful that you are speaking in terms of the expertise that have. You're not a toxicologist, are you?
Dr Barry Walsh believes there are grounds for an insanity and infanticide defence. A discovery that gluten can cause brain inflammation in mice could have serious implications for humans. The study, which is believed to be a world first, was done by scientists at Aotearoa University. Research lead Alexander Tups says they fed mice a gluten-enriched diet and found it increased body weight and immune cells that were indicative of brain inflammation.
And what was interesting, we gave it to a normal diet and also to a diet that is enriched in saturated fat, for example, enriched in lard. And we saw that in both cases it increases the number of these immune cells.
Alexander Tups says the results of the study suggest it could be beneficial to reduce gluten consumption. Armed police have responded to a family harm call-out in Newtown near Wellington Zoo this afternoon. Police say they were called at 4 o'clock. Roads around the zoo were closed and its staff were stopped from leaving. Police say armed officers were deployed as a precaution after a man made threats. He was taken into custody just after 5 o'clock. They say nobody was injured. And in sport, Hurricanes rugby player Isaiah Walker-Leawere has been banned for a month after testing positive for cannabis. Walker-Leawere tested positive a week after the Hurricanes match against the Fijian Drua in May. The usual ban is for 3 months, but Drug Free Sport New Zealand says Walker-Leawere received a shorter month-long ban on the condition he completes a treatment program. Drug Free Sport Chief Executive Nick Patterson says they don't believe cannabis is performance-enhancing and have been advocating for its removal from the prohibited list. But he says while cannabis remains banned, the best approach for athletes is to avoid using it. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Mihingarangi Forbes, host of Mata, RNZ's Māori political podcast, where commentators, newsmakers and politicians wānanga the big issues this election year.
Would you consider a coalition with the National Party?
Holy hikama, they'd have to pretty much have surgical transformation.
Nō reira, ariari taringa mai kia Mata with Mihingarangi Forbes after the 6:30 headlines. Tonight on RNZ National.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You are listening to RNZ National and watching us, hopefully. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Taranaki, a few showers. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumarunui, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow with morning frosts. Wairarapa, Whanganui and from Taihape to Wellington, also for Nelson and Buller. Scattered showers, some heavy with hail clearing tonight or tomorrow morning and becoming fine for a time. Rain or showers developing tomorrow afternoon or evening. For Westland and Fiordland, occasional showers in southern Fiordland and a period of rain tomorrow, otherwise fine. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow afternoon or evening with heavy snow inland above 200 metres. Otago and Southland, occasional showers with snow above 300 metres, becoming frequent and heavier tomorrow and snow lowering to 100 or 200 metres. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloud increasing, rain developing this evening, then turning to showers tomorrow morning. It is 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Greenpeace is calling for caution when it comes to the mega private green investment fund unveiled by the Prime Minister today. The government's partnered with a controversial investment giant BlackRock to launch a $2 billion fund to help transition Aotearoa to 100% renewable electricity by 2030. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says it's a game changer, but there was limited detail about how the fund will work and what T's and C's there might be. BlackRock is a big investor in fossil fuels and is currently being investigated in the US for allegedly investing in blacklisted Chinese companies that are on a no-go list for human rights and security reasons. Greenpeace is concerned about the heavy reliance on private investment and a lack of policy details with the announcement. John Berry from Pathfinder Asset Management told us earlier in the program, whilst we shouldn't necessarily be wary about BlackRock, we do need to ensure their investments in renewable energy make sense in New Zealand. Energy Minister Megan Woods says it creates huge opportunities for Aotearoa.
So what this does is it's going to crowd in investment in New Zealand. So there's a lot of options in terms of our own sovereign funds, super fund, ACT and other private investment funds that will want to group together to back New Zealand businesses who have got great innovative ideas around how not only it is that New Zealand can move to renewable electricity, but also the kinds of ideas that we can sell to the world. I think there's fantastic export opportunities for us here as well.
So what are the T's and C's, the terms and conditions, Minister? Is money can come from anywhere? What kind of projects can it go into? Would it be okay for that fund to be involved in mission critical infrastructure? What are the parameters?
So this is a fund that is largely directed towards private businesses. So start-up clean tech companies in the areas of like solar, wind, green hydrogen, battery storage. We're not talking about the transmission and distribution or even the ability really to invest in mixed ownership model energy companies. It's what are already private businesses that are looking for capital to be able to expand and to do what they need to do, not only for New Zealand, for the world. The BlackRock said that it wants to crowd in New Zealand investment as its first port of call. And what we saw from the people that attended today, not only did we have some of our large investment funds, but we had representatives from some iwi. We had a range of different organisations that are interested in how it is that they can be part of raising the capital for what are significant opportunities for New Zealand.
So the government doesn't care where the money comes from and is not concerned who is investing?
So the conversations that we've had with BlackRock around this is largely drawing in from domestic investment. There's a lot of money in New Zealand that could actually be pointed towards backing our local businesses.
But Minister, to be clear, there is no restrictions on international investment and where that money comes from.
No, there is no restrictions, but with the conversations that we've had with BlackRock is there is significant interest in New Zealand and more than enough interest in New Zealand to cover off that $2 billion fund. That what we have is we have some of our own sovereign funds looking for investments in other countries in renewable energy because there haven't been investments of that scale in New Zealand to date. And this will change. It will allow New Zealand capital to invest in New Zealand projects, be part of our decarbonisation journey, but also significantly for me, also grow our economy while we cut our emissions.
But there's no guarantees it will just be New Zealand capital. That's the whole point. They're going to raise $2 billion.
Yeah, but the conversations we have had, Lisa, are pointing directly to the fact there is significant interest in New Zealand. We're already seeing New Zealand sovereign funds having to look offshore for opportunities rather than there being domestic opportunities. So they're confident that there is already significant interest.
What consideration was given to the fact that BlackRock is one of the world's biggest investors in oil and gas and fossil fuels?
Yeah, and a lot of consideration was given to that as we've been having the conversations, and we've made it really clear that anything that the government in New Zealand would be encouraging was very much directed towards what we needed to do to expand renewable energy in New Zealand, around what it is that we need to do investing in terms of the likes of solar, wind, green hydrogen, battery storage, and what part that could play in our decarbonisation.
Is there any restriction on the minister, should they? I understand you made it clear that that's your primary consideration, but is there any restriction should they choose to invest in fossil fuels?
Well, it's a net zero fund, so I can't imagine that a net zero fund
legally, Minister.
Well, I mean, there will be in terms of the investors that go into it. I think the name's on the tin. It's net zero. It's not a fund that's looking to invest in fossil fuels. This is a fund that is explicitly set up towards decarbonisation.
Right, and you've got the legal parameters to make sure that that is the case?
Well, obviously the government isn't putting money into this. This is what we've been encouraging. But when they attract the money in, there will be legal parameters around the fact that this is a net zero fund. There is no suggestion that anyone is looking at setting up a fund for expanding fossil fuels in New Zealand. This is a fund that is explicitly about what New Zealand needs to do to decarbonise its electricity and energy systems. It's not about fossil fuels.
So have you given any direction or sought any assurances from BlackRock that, for example, this will go into community-based projects, renewable energy projects for households? Have you given them any set parameters to work within, or is it carte blanche? They can do whatever they like in terms of choosing their investments.
So in terms of the kinds of things that New Zealand companies are doing, we already know that BlackRock is investing in some New Zealand renewable energy companies, and Solar Zero is a really good example. And that is a different way of doing solar and batteries on households. And actually what we saw from that was that during the extreme weather events in the North Island, is that through its virtual power plant, Solar Zero customers in the Hawke's Bay never completely lost electricity. They were able to, keep enough on to boil the jug, keep the water hot, those kind of things. So there's a range of different companies, and I think one of the things that excites me about the clean tech innovation that we're seeing in New Zealand, that a lot of it is about how it is that we can do things in a more distributed way, that we can have community scale projects. But we haven't given instruction that what they will be looking for is opportunities, the kinds of things that companies are doing in New Zealand, and it's exactly what you described.
Okay, Minister, I just really want to be clear on this. One of the biggest investors in fossil fuels, oil and gas, this is a company that is currently being investigated in America for investments in China and allegedly blacklisted companies, blacklisted for human rights and security reasons. and for, quote, exacerbating an already significant national security threat and undermining American values. So they're under investigation for that. You have no qualms whatsoever in terms of entering into an arrangement with this company on an ethical level. No issues.
We've been incredibly clear what the parameters of the fund are, and I think one of the things that BlackRock is already investing in New Zealand and has been for quite a period of time. This is not new, but this is about BlackRock for the first time setting up a countrywide fund that is explicitly around reaching those goals. And these are New Zealand goals. These are not goals that anyone else has written. That BlackRock came here because of New Zealand's ambition, because of our stated goals and what we put out there as the direction our country wanted to go in. We are not deviating from that.
And that is the Energy Minister, Megan Woods there. It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Motorists can expect more pain at the pump as petrol prices once again start to trend upwards. Price tracking website Gaspy reports that the average price for unleaded 91 has gone up by 4.7% in the last 28 days to $2.78. This follows the government's fuel subsidy coming to an end in June, as well as a volatile global fuel market. Delphine Herbert has the story.
The end of the government's fuel subsidy, coupled with the rising price of oil globally, means motorists are once again feeling the pinch at the pump. In the last 28 days, the price of unleaded 91 jumped up by 4.7% to $2.78 a litre, while 98 was up 5.4% to just over $3. Auckland resident Akshay says he certainly notices the difference when he fills up these days.
I think it's really high, and with the government subsidy going away, I think it's making a lot of people in hardship, and with the rise of interest rates and everything, definitely adds up on the monthly expenditures,
He wants the government to reintroduce the fuel subsidy 25 cents a litre fuel discount, which ended in June.
At least until the interest rates come down a bit, just help out the people a bit, I think everybody's finding it very tough. I mean, at least for us, we have company cars, so we don't feel the pinch too much, but a lot of other people, they do,
But Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says reintroducing the fuel subsidy is not on the table right now.
I've indicated this morning that we're not intending to reintroduce that.
National has other ideas on how to provide financial relief to New Zealanders. Leader Christopher Luxon says if elected, his party would give people income tax relief to help with costs like fuel.
And that's why we say inflation adjusting tax thresholds are so important, because it means that New Zealanders get to keep their own money in their own pocket. And it's not just petrol prices that are going through the roof at the moment. It's also been rents, it's also been food, it's also been mortgage rates. And so we want to be able to let New Zealanders keep more of the money that they earn.
He believes government spending is to blame for rising costs.
We have a major challenge in this country where this government's spending has actually created domestic inflation. It's not international inflation, it's domestic inflation that's our problem. That's caused high interest rates and that's caused a recession. And so the challenge is to deal with the underlying causes of inflation again.
Automobile Association Principal Advisor Terry Collins says the price rise is also due to Saudi Arabia cutting oil production.
In the last month, we've gone up from having around about the mid-70s for a barrel of oil, sometimes as low as $72. Now we're seeing it about $86. So that 10 cents a barrel increase over the last month has added about 10 cents to a litre of fuel.
He expects the upward trend to continue in the medium term.
What I'm assuming to see is the prices going up slowly. I think they're looking at stabilising the barrel around about $90 a barrel, somewhere around there. They're doing it by production cuts. The inventories, although China's got a big inventory right now and perhaps could put a bit downward pressure to negotiate it if it got too high too quick.
Gaspy data shows Gull petrol stations in Hampton Downs and Te Awamutu have the cheapest 91 in the country, sitting at $2.48 a litre.
The Ukrainian Security Service says it's detained a woman who was allegedly plotting an attack on President Zelensky. The SBU says she was trying to find out the itinerary for his visit to the southern region of Mykolaiv so the Russians could prepare a massive airstrike on the area. Moscow hasn't commented on the arrest. Here's the BBC's James Waterhouse reporting from Kiev.
According to investigators, the woman tried to find out President Zelensky's itinerary ahead of his visit at the end of July, and so they stepped in after investigating her for weeks. She faces a string of accusations, including leaking information to her Russian handlers several times. It's been reported she would travel around the area and take pictures of different sites to help the Russians locate Ukrainian electronic warfare systems and ammunition depots. Ukraine Security Service spokesman is Artem Dekterenko.
Security service officers caught an accomplice of Russia red-handed when she was trying to transfer information to the invaders. According to the investigation, the perpetrator turned out to be a resident of Achakiv, who was a former saleswoman in a shop in one of the military units in the region.
Pursuing informants is now a common task for Ukrainian investigators in this conflict, and the penalties are steep. In this case, the woman faces up to 12 years in prison. Russia has not commented. While this isn't an unprecedented threat to President Zelensky, it still illustrates the personal risks he faces when he travels across Ukraine.
Residents in one of the world's largest slums say they're worried about billionaire Gautam Adani's moves to develop their homes into expensive apartments and offices in Mumbai. The slum received worldwide attention from the film Slumdog Millionaire, but its residents say they've been left in the dark about the plans. Here's the ABC's South Asia correspondent, Avani Diaz.
For generations, Abbas Galwani's family has been working as potters in one of the world's largest slums, Dharavi. 1 million people live here, and the majority, like Abbas, also work in the slum.
For us, Dharavi is the heart of India. The residents who live here belong to different castes and religions. We have our homes, factories, shops, all here.
Gautam Adani, one of the world's richest people, has now won a government bid to redevelop this slum into urban real estate. It's set to make him billions of dollars. Mr. Adani says the redevelopment will bring sanitation and gas to Dharavi. Residents agree their homes need to be upgraded, but they're worried about their workplaces, which don't appear to be included in the plans.
If you have a better place to live but there's no food, then what's the point of being in a better place? We live and work together. These small factories could grow into large-scale industries if the government supports us.
Dharavi is in the centre of Mumbai's CBD. Dwellings have been built on top of each other for years, and you have to walk down narrow alleyways to get around, under a canopy of electrical wires. But the industries in the slum, like pottery, leather and recycling, make an estimated turnover of around $1 billion each year.
If Dharavi gets redeveloped, then where will our industries, commercial units and culture go? The people's traditional life and culture are protected here.
Mr. Adani, whose companies range from the Australian Carmichael coal mine to Indian infrastructure, has written in a blog post that Dharavi's residents will be at the centre of the redevelopment. It will be a bottom-up project reflecting their views and sentiments to the maximum extent possible, he says. But on the ground, residents like Minakshi Savania tell us they haven't heard from the company.
Israel's chief military spokesman says violent attacks by Jewish settlers against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank amount to terrorism. The comments by Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari echo those reportedly made by the head of Israel's Internal Security Service, which have been denounced by some far-right politicians in the government. Here's the BBC's Middle East correspondent, Yolande Nell.
In a round of interviews on Israeli media, the army's top spokesman addressed a weekend of violence in the West Bank and Israel. On Friday, a young Palestinian man was killed in an attack by armed settlers on a village near Ramallah. And the next day, a Palestinian fatally shot a security guard in Tel Aviv before another guard shot him dead. Yesterday, Israeli forces killed 3 Palestinians in Jenin, who were said to have been planning an attack. Speaking to the Ynet news site, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari strengthened his usual language to describe settler violence as terrorism, and he said it was pushing Palestinians into what he called terror too.
Nationalist crime and nationalist terror is terror. I don't have any other way to say it. It pushes civilians who are not involved in terror in the Palestinian Authority to terror.
Those remarks echo a warning that was reportedly given by the head of Israel's Internal Security Service to the Prime Minister before Friday's deadly incidents. Far-right members of the governing coalition then accused him of being a leftist and unable to distinguish between the enemy and his own people, prompting the Prime Minister to voice his support for his security official. There's been growing international concern about a recent rise in violence by extremist settlers under Israel's hardline government, with the US also labelling Friday's attack as terrorism.
The UK has begun a controversial policy of housing asylum seekers on a massive barge as it faces a growing backlog of refugee claims. Up to 500 men will be housed in the facility. Here's the ABC's Nick Dole.
Say it loud, say it clear. Refugees are welcome here.
As asylum seekers make their way to the dock in Portland in southern England, a small group of supporters is trying to make them feel welcome. Some people have brought down toiletries and other supplies to make their stay more comfortable.
We wanted really just to show we cared. We wanted to show that actually there is support from the local community.
The way that the government has been running their asylum policy is set up to target these people and to scapegoat them.
Dorset in the summer is often packed with tourists on beachside holidays, but these asylum seekers won't be expecting any luxury. Their new home will be the Bibby Stockholm, a grey multi-storey barge. It looks less like a boat and more like a floating ultra-budget motel. Inside there are more than 200 rooms with bunk beds and ensuite bathrooms. There's a cafeteria, a gym and a recreation area. There's also Wi-Fi and residents can come and go. But it's by no means plush. And according to Home Office Minister Sarah Dines, that's the point.
What it sends is a forceful message that there will be proper accommodation, but not luxurious. Luxurious hotel accommodation has been part of the pull, I'm afraid. Criminal gangs, which are trying to get people into the country unlawfully. They say you'll be staying in a very nice hotel in the middle of a town in England. That needs to stop.
The barge has previously been used to house oil and gas workers in Scotland and asylum seekers in Europe. But the UK is planning to squeeze about 500 people in, prompting the Fire Brigade Union to label the vessel a potential death trap. The firm overseeing the accommodation is Australian company Corporate Travel Management. Nobody from the company was available for interview. The UK government says the barge will help it save on its hotel bill for asylum seekers, which is nearly $12 million a day. But Labor's Nick Thomas-Simons says that's a problem of the government's own making.
They have 173,000 people now who are in the backlog in our asylum system. That's the reason that they've ended up having to use hotels and bases and now this barge. They are there because of their chronic failure.
The UK's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda has been deemed unlawful, so Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is looking for a new deterrent to stop people arriving in small boats. But refugee advocate Louise Calvi says the barge won't have that effect.
Their own research tells them why people cross, and it's because A, they can't get visa access, and B, they have family or links and ties in the UK. If you're prepared to put yourself and your family on a boat, on a raft, on a dinghy, and cross one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, being placed on a barge when you get here is not going to disincentivise you. There is nothing this government can do that can be as terrifying as the journeys these people are going through every day.
That is us for the evening, but if you want more, ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, talks climate infrastructure with economist Bernard Hickey and asks Climate Change Minister James Shaw about the deal with BlackRock. 5 a.m, set your alarm, it'll be a cracker, and we'll see you a little later in the day.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government's announced a $2 billion green energy partnership with US investment giant BlackRock. But the head of Pathfinder Asset Management, John Berry, says ministers should be aware of BlackRock's motivations. The Bao homicide investigation is focusing on rural areas south of Christchurch. Ukraine says at least 8 people have died after a Russian missile strike in the eastern town of Pokrovsk. And the funeral procession of singer Sinead O'Connor will take place later in Ireland. Those are the headlines. You're with Matanet.